The sun still lingered below the horizon on April 6, 2003, casting long shadows across the rugged hills and dusty plains of northern Iraq. A crisp chill hung in the air, the kind that clung to uniforms and crept under body armor. It was the kind of morning that seemed quiet, too quiet for what was coming. In the pre-dawn gloom, a pair of battered Toyota Hilux trucks bounced along a rutted dirt path, followed by a column of up-armored Humvees with heavy M2 Browning machine guns and Mark 19 grenade launchers bristling from their turrets. Inside, the men of Operational Detachment Alpha 391 and 392, 3rd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group, Airborne, scanned the horizon through scopes and night vision goggles, their breath visible in the cold morning air. They weren't alone. Beside them, clinging to the rough terrain in worn combat boots and mismatched camouflage, were dozens of Kurdish Peshmerga fighters, weathered warriors who had spent decades resisting Saddam's regime. Some wore traditional baggy pants and turbans, while others had adopted more modern gear, but all carried Kalashnikovs slung casually over their shoulders. These men weren't just allies. They were the key to the American strategy in the north, a local force with the terrain knowledge and motivation that even the best satellite maps and recon drones couldn't replicate. The objective ahead was Debecka Pass, a name that meant little to the world then, but one that would soon echo through the halls of military academies as a case study in modern warfare. Located at a crucial crossroads between the small towns of Debecka and Altun Kupri, the pass straddled Highway 2, a vital artery running east to west in northern Iraq. On a map, it looked like just another road junction. But for the men rolling toward it, the pass was everything. To Saddam Hussein's regime, it was the spinal cord of northern Iraq's military defense grid. Whoever controlled Debecka controlled movement between Mosul and Kirkuk. And Kirkuk, that oil-rich city nestled in the northern arc of Iraq, was more than just strategic. It was symbolic, economic, and tactical gold. If Kirkuk fell, it would not only cripple the Ba'athist regime's finances, but also signal the collapse of northern Iraq's defenses. The Americans knew this. The Peshmerga knew it even better. As the Special Forces teams pushed forward, they reviewed the latest intelligence. Satellite imagery had revealed several Iraqi mechanized units operating in the area, including armored elements from the 8th Infantry Division. There were reports, unconfirmed but persistent, of T-55 and T-62 tanks being repositioned to reinforce the area. There were also indications that remnants of the Iraqi 5th Corps had pulled back toward Altun Kupri, possibly to mount a defense of Kirkuk or stage a counterattack. It was hard to say. Northern Iraq was a patchwork of uncertainty, and information was as volatile as the weather. For ODA 391 and 392, the plan was deceptively straightforward. Move to high ground southwest of the crossroads, establish a blocking position, and hold until reinforcements arrived. The terrain offered a natural defensive advantage: low ridgelines, open fields with clear lines of fire, and few natural obstacles for approaching armor. But that also meant it worked both ways. If the Iraqis brought tanks, there would be little cover to stop them. If air support was delayed, or if the weather grounded gunships, the Special Forces and their Kurdish allies would be left to face armored columns with little more than Javelin missiles, heavy machine guns, and grit. They reached the high ground just after dawn. The teams quickly moved to emplace their weapons and establish fields of fire. Javelin launchers were unpacked and placed on tripods, gunners crawling into position with rangefinders and batteries. Spotters zeroed their optics on the roadway. The Peshmerga set up makeshift firing positions along the low ridge, digging shallow foxholes and covering their flanks. Radios crackled with coded updates. Calls were made to overhead assets, UAVs and close air support aircraft already en route. Time passed. The chill of morning began to fade, replaced by the baking heat of the Iraqi sun. Dust devils curled in the distance. The highway stretched ahead, empty and silent. But the silence didn't last. Just before midday, a Kurdish scout came running across the hilltop, pointing toward the horizon. Through binoculars, the Special Forces operators saw the unmistakable silhouettes of approaching armored vehicles. Not trucks, not technicals, tanks. 4 Iraqi T-55 main battle tanks rolled into view, flanked by a pair of BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles. Behind them came troop trucks, possibly ZILs or Ural 375s, loaded with infantry. The convoy moved with purpose, hugging the road and fanning out slightly as it approached the pass. The Iraqis had seen the Americans too. They knew the hill was occupied, and they were coming to take it back. Without hesitation, the Green Berets sprang into action. Target acquired, T-55, range 1,100 meters, firing! The first Javelin launched with a whoosh, streaking across the sky before slamming into the lead tank. A brilliant flash followed, a fireball that lifted the turret clean off the chassis. Cheers erupted from the Peshmerga line, but there was no time to celebrate. The second tank swung its barrel and returned fire. A thunderous explosion rocked the hillside, dirt and rock raining down on the Special Forces position. It missed, but just barely. Another Javelin fired. Another tank erupted in flames. The BMPs peeled off, one heading for cover while the other opened fire with its 73mm gun, the round exploding just short of the American line. A Mk-19 grenade launcher answered, sending a cascade of high-explosive grenades into the vehicle's flank. The BMP shuddered, veered off course, and came to a smoking halt. Then the infantry arrived. Dozens of Iraqi soldiers dismounted and began advancing across the open terrain, AKs blazing. The Peshmerga rose from cover, screaming battle cries, and let loose a withering barrage. The ridgeline lit up with tracer fire. American operators joined in, expertly placing rifle bursts and calling in air support. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, salvation arrived. From the southern sky came the thunderous roar of American aircraft. 2 F-15Es screamed overhead, followed by the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt. The Warthog dove low, its 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon chewing through what remained of the Iraqi convoy. Armor exploded. Infantry scattered. Within minutes, the battle was over. Smoke curled from the burning wrecks. The road was littered with debris, shattered vehicles, twisted metal, and spent brass. The Kurdish fighters stood victorious, cheering and embracing the Green Berets who had led them into the fire. The Battle of Debecka Pass lasted less than an hour, but its impact was monumental. It proved that a handful of well-trained operators, partnered with local allies and backed by precision air power, could defeat a numerically superior force. It opened the road to Kirkuk, and it shattered the myth that the Iraqi Army could hold the north. For ODA 391 and 392, it was just another mission. For military history, it was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The men of ODA 391 and 392 had seen their share of impossible odds. They had trained for years in the unforgiving deserts of the American Southwest, deployed to war zones that tested the limits of endurance and judgment, and operated behind enemy lines in places the world would never hear about. But as their convoy of ground mobility vehicles crested the dusty ridgeline west of Debecka on the morning of April 6, 2003, even the most battle-hardened among them understood. This was different. This was the knife's edge. The terrain was unforgiving. Low, rolling hills broken by wheat fields and rocky outcroppings provided little in the way of hard cover. The pass itself stretched out like a funnel, flat and open, a perfect kill zone for anyone trying to hold the line. But the mission demanded it. Debecka was more than a waypoint. It was a gate. If the Iraqis poured through, they'd reach Kirkuk unopposed. The northern front would collapse. The stakes weren't just tactical. They were strategic, political, historic. As the Green Berets vehicles settled into position, the wind picked up, sweeping fine layers of sand across the ridgeline. Peshmerga fighters began dismounting, spreading out with practiced efficiency. These Kurdish warriors, many with decades of experience fighting Saddam's forces, moved with an urgency born of survival. They knew this ground. They knew the enemy. And they knew that time was running out. The Americans worked fast. The GMVs, barely armored but fast and modular, were parked behind low rises, each one mounted with either a .50 cal machine gun or a Mark 19 grenade launcher. They weren't designed to take hits. They were designed to hit first. Around them, Green Berets dismounted with purpose. They moved low, rifles slung tight, scanning every ridge and depression. Their M4A1 carbines, many fitted with suppressors, optics, and laser designators, looked nothing like the rifles seen in standard infantry hands. These were tools of the trade, battle-tested, modified for speed, silence, and precision. Javelin launchers were unpacked and positioned across likely approach vectors. Batteries were checked, launch units calibrated, and targets plotted. These missiles were the team's ace, the one weapon that could level the playing field against Iraqi armor. Each one cost nearly $200,000. But against a tank, the price was cheap. A few hundred meters down the ridge, Peshmerga fighters dug in with entrenching tools, using rocks and dirt to form makeshift fighting positions. Their PKM machine guns were set up on bipods, RPG launchers angled toward the valley. They weren't professionals by American standards, but their courage was not in question. Many had lost families, homes, everything, to Saddam's regime. For them, this wasn't just war. It was vengeance. Then came the wait. For hours, nothing moved. The valley was still. The wheat bent gently in the breeze. Occasionally, the silence was broken by radio chatter or the metallic click of a magazine being loaded, but otherwise, the world felt suspended. Then, around 10:40 a.m., that silence broke. Scouts, Kurdish fighters positioned farther forward, came sprinting back toward the ridgeline. One waved frantically. The other shouted over the wind in Kurdish, his voice tight with urgency. "Vehicles, tanks, coming from Altun Kupri!" Within minutes, optics confirmed the nightmare. A mechanized Iraqi column was advancing from the southeast. T-55 tanks led the way. Cold War relics, yes, but still lethal. Behind them came armored personnel carriers, BMP-1s and BTRs likely, trailed by flatbed trucks with DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine guns mounted on rusted tripods. The trucks bristled with soldiers, some waving, some firing celebratory bursts into the sky as if they were already victorious. From the Americans' perspective, it looked less like a formation and more like a medieval horde. Undisciplined, but massive. This was no probing attack. It was a hammer. Captain Elias Hawk Danner, the team leader, barked commands into the radio, instantly coordinating with his counterpart from ODA 392. They split sectors of fire, relayed targeting data, and gave the order to prepare for engagement. Communications specialist Corporal Marcus Kim attempted to raise air support. Calls went out to higher command and orbiting assets, but confirmation would take time. They might have minutes, they might have hours, or they might be alone. There was no guarantee of help. Still, the teams prepared like it was coming. The first tank crested the far side of the valley, engine growling. A green, dust-coated T-55, its long barrel sweeping left to right, scanning. Behind it, a second and third appeared. One stopped. The turret turned. The driver angled the vehicle toward the ridge. They'd seen them. "Fire!" someone shouted. The first Javelin launcher roared, the missile arcing skyward before diving into the tank's upper armor like a hawk striking prey. A moment later, detonation. The turret flew off in a fountain of smoke and shrapnel, landing 20 meters from the hull. The Peshmerga cheered. The Americans didn't celebrate. There were more. Seconds later, the .50 cals opened up, firing at troop trucks and visible infantry. The heavy rounds tore through engines, steel plating, and bodies alike. Mk-19 grenade launchers added to the chaos, their 40mm rounds exploding in rapid succession along the road, tearing through soft targets. Another Javelin fired. Another tank exploded. The Iraqis responded. Wild, panicked return fire. Heavy machine gun tracers lashed the ridgeline. RPGs arced overhead. A BMP rolled forward and fired its low-velocity cannon. It missed, sending a plume of dirt and rock skyward just meters from the Green Beret position. Another vehicle followed, spraying fire. Then came the infantry. Waves of Iraqi soldiers dismounted from the remaining vehicles and began charging across the open ground, weapons raised, shouting in Arabic. But the approach was suicidal. The Americans had elevation, range, and discipline. The Peshmerga fired in unison. The Green Berets fired in measured bursts. Dozens fell before they reached halfway. Some dropped their weapons and ran. Still, the pressure mounted. Rounds struck dangerously close. One GMV took a glancing hit from an RPG, its rear axle shattered, its gunner thrown to the ground but alive. Medics pulled him back as the others continued firing. Another Javelin team repositioned, launched a missile at a tank flanking from the west. Direct hit. They were holding for now. Then, just before noon, the sky split with sound. Two F-15Es screamed in from the south, their gray bodies slicing through the clouds at high speed. They dropped flares as they banked hard, then angled toward the valley. A heartbeat later, bombs fell. Precision-guided munitions striking Iraqi positions with stunning accuracy. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off, vehicles bursting into flame. Behind them, the unmistakable roar of an A-10 Thunderbolt. The Warthog came in low and slow, its GAU-8 Avenger cannon igniting in a stream of yellow fire. The sound was deafening. Iraqi vehicles shredded under the weight of 30mm depleted uranium rounds. Tanks popped like balloons. Trucks overturned. Survivors ran for the hills. The field was theirs. Smoke and dust choked the valley. Fires burned unchecked. The Iraqi force, once confident and loud, was now nothing but scattered metal and scorched bodies. The Green Berets moved quickly, clearing, reloading, checking for wounded. The Peshmerga began chanting. For them, this was liberation. For the Americans, it was a miracle, and a victory pulled from the jaws of annihilation. The Battle of Debecka Pass wasn't just a tactical win. It was proof that special forces, properly supported and perfectly positioned, could hold back an entire armored assault with ingenuity, bravery, and overwhelming precision. And it sent a clear message across northern Iraq. The road to Kirkuk was no longer defended. It was open, and the war had changed. The tanks crested the ridge like steel beasts awakened from slumber, their turrets scanning, engines roaring with the harsh growl of Soviet-era diesel. The earth trembled beneath their treads. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow, the shimmer of heat waves off armor, the sun glinting off rounded turrets, the dust trailing behind them like storm clouds. It was a sight out of history, and yet terrifyingly present. The T-55s were old, yes, but they were still tanks. Armored predators, perfectly capable of killing anything in their path. "Contact front!" came the shout over the comms. "Armor! 3 clicks! Closing fast!" The American operators moved on instinct. No time for second-guessing. They dropped into firing positions like a machine running a drill it had rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. 2 Green Berets, Staff Sergeant Kyle Henson and Sergeant Ray Doc Alvarez, knelt behind a sand berm, the hard polymer casings of their Javelin tubes biting into their shoulders. The missile's guidance unit lit up with a soft electronic tone, pulsing louder as it homed in on the infrared signature of the nearest tank. Dust swirled around them. The ground quivered. "Clear backblast! Backblast! Clear! Firing!" The first javelin streaked into the air with a sharp bang, tracing a perfect arc against the dull blue of the Iraqi sky. The missile climbed, then curved down in a graceful, horrifying plunge, striking the lead T-55 squarely on its turret roof. The explosion wasn't just a burst, it was a violent eruption. Fire and black smoke belched into the sky as the tank's turret blew apart like a soda can in a fire pit, shrapnel spinning end over end across the field. The massive vehicle staggered, then stopped, black smoke pouring from its shattered hull. But the enemy didn't hesitate. The other tanks accelerated, spreading into a staggered wedge formation. Whoever was commanding them knew what he was doing. Keep moving, avoid bunching, make them earn every shot. The BMPs that followed were already raking the ridgeline with cannon fire. 30mm high-explosive rounds pounded the earth, tearing through brush and dirt like a giant's claws. Palm-sized chunks of shrapnel whizzed through the air, burying into sandbags, ricocheting off exposed rock, one round even snapping a Peshmerga fighter's AK clean in half as he ducked. The Kurdish lines responded with fury. PKM machine guns clattered non-stop, spraying the advancing infantry that dismounted from trucks behind the armor. RPGs arced across the field, some too short, some too wide, a few hitting with satisfying thuds that rocked APCs on their suspensions. The Peshmerga were outgunned, but they fought like men who had nothing to lose. Another American Javelin launched. This one aimed at a BMP that was trying to angle itself into a flanking position. The missile locked on, fired, and struck just above the tracks. The explosion gutted the vehicle, flipping its rear hatch into the air like a piece of foil. Black-uniformed Iraqi troops spilled from the wreckage, some moving, some not. Bullets zipped past Sergeant Alvarez's head as he ducked behind a berm. "They're spreading left," he shouted, switching out the Javelin's guidance unit with quick, practiced movements. The launcher's casing was hot. Too hot to touch without gloves. Henson called it out again. "Two more tanks, bearing east. They're going for a wide flank." "Kim, where's that air support?" Danner's voice barked over comms. "Still no birds," came the reply. "AWACS has us marked, but they're stacked over Baghdad. We're alone for now." "Then we fight," Danner growled. "Hold the line." The GMVs repositioned, bouncing across the uneven terrain, throwing dust and gravel in their wake. One unit with a mounted .50 cal got into position behind a low stone wall and began hammering a distant technical, an open-bed Iraqi truck with a mounted DSHK. The heavy machine gun barked like thunder, slamming into the vehicle's windshield, engine block, and gunner in 3 controlled bursts. The truck veered, exploded as the rounds hit its fuel tank, but the armor kept coming. A T-55 fired, the blast a brutal crack that echoed off the hills. The shells slammed into the edge of the ridgeline, spraying dirt and shrapnel. One Peshmerga fighter was knocked backward, screaming, his leg mangled below the knee. The Americans dragged him to safety, wrapping a tourniquet even as more rounds slammed around them. It was chaos. Dirt flew, radios screamed, bullets sang. And then another Javelin fired. This one launched. By a team near the western flank, struck a second tank just behind its turret. The impact set off its internal munitions. The resulting explosion lifted the vehicle into the air briefly before slamming it down sideways in a twisted wreck. Another BMP, too close to react, plowed into the burning hull and caught fire itself. The valley was a furnace now, smoke rising, vehicles burning, ground littered with spent brass and splintered rock. Still, the Iraqis pushed. Infantry squads began bounding forward under covering fire, sprinting between low rocks and burnt-out vehicles. The Peshmerga fought like wolves, popping up from trenches, unleashing bursts from AKs, falling back, then firing again. American gunners from the GMVs laid down overlapping fields of fire, stitching lines across the field to suppress enemy movement. A technical got too close. "Grenade out!" yelled one of the Green Berets as a 40mm high explosive round from the Mark 19 arced through the air. It landed just beneath the truck. The explosion flipped it like a toy, scattering bodies. It was working, but just barely. Another tank made a dash for high ground. It was trying to gain overwatch, maybe fire directly into the Peshmerga trenches, but its maneuver exposed it to a Javelin team hidden behind a rocky bluff. The launcher came up, locked on, and fired. The missile screamed across the sky and struck just as the turret began to rotate toward the American position. The tank exploded in a fireball that rolled smoke over the valley floor. And then, finally, air support. Over the radios, the call came in. "Thunder 2-1, 2 minutes out." Cheers erupted across the ridgeline. F-15Es roared in low, splitting the sky with sonic thunder. One after another, they released their payloads. The first bomb struck the rear of the Iraqi formation, 2 BMPs and a cluster of infantry trucks. The second hit the tanks trying to regroup near the eastern flank. Fireballs blossomed into the sky. The shockwaves rolled across the valley like a fist. When the A-10s came in, it wasn't even a fight anymore. The Warthogs tore into what was left, 30mm rounds ripping vehicles apart, detonating ammo, mowing down infantry who had nowhere to run. Some Iraqis dropped their weapons. Others fled on foot, tossing helmets and vests behind them. The field was a graveyard. When the smoke finally settled and the last echoes of cannon fire faded into silence, the Americans and Peshmerga emerged from their positions, sweaty, soot-streaked, eyes bloodshot and ears ringing. They had survived, barely, but they had held the line. At Debecka Pass, a few dozen men with no armor and no artillery had faced down an armored assault and won. Not by luck, not by overwhelming firepower, but by grit, training, and refusing to break. And somewhere far away, in a dark bunker beneath Baghdad, Saddam's generals saw the flames rising from Debecka and began to understand. The North was lost. Rounds zipped past heads. Chunks of dirt flew into the air. The Americans responded with Mk-19s thumping rapid-fire grenades into the valley. A Peshmerga RPG crew took out a BMP at close range, the explosion scattering burning metal across a dirt road. Kurdish fighters cheered and fired wildly, but the battle was far from over. A second Javelin missile took out another tank. The American teams moved constantly. Fire, reposition, reload. A U.S. team leader radioed for close air support. His voice was calm, precise. "Contact. Armor in open. Need KS on grid 38 South ME 235682 2 minutes ticked by." The Iraqis were closing. One of the GMVs took a hit from small arms fire. A machine gunner was grazed across the arm but kept firing, his .50 cal barrel glowing red hot. Iraqi soldiers dismounted from their vehicles and began advancing on foot, using irrigation ditches and bushes for cover. It was a full-scale assault now. Another Javelin took flight. Boom, third tank down. But the Iraqis didn't flinch. They were desperate, and they were brave. Some charged with AKs, trying to reach the American position. Peshmerga fighters met them with grenades and close-quarters fire. Then the radios crackled. "Fast movers inbound. 2 F-15Es, 5 minutes out." Relief rippled through the American lines. The team leader adjusted his radio, lacing targets with a SOFLAM, Special Operations Forces Laser Acquisition Marker. He called out Iraqi positions, tanks, BMPs, infantry clusters. And then they came. The sound of jet engines tore across the sky. F-15E Strike Eagles screamed in low over the valley, releasing precision-guided JDAM bombs. One struck a tank in mid-turn, sending a shockwave that could be felt a kilometer away. Another cratered a road packed with Iraqi infantry. The enemy formation buckled. Survivors scrambled back toward Altun-Kupri. Some ran. Others abandoned their vehicles. The Peshmerga surged forward, mopping up resistance and capturing stragglers. By late afternoon, the battlefield was littered with destroyed Iraqi hardware. Smoke curled from blackened tank hulks. Shell casings blanketed the ground. The Americans had suffered only minor wounds, an astonishing outcome considering the scale of the assault. But they knew it wasn't over. That night, the Green Berets stayed alert. They repositioned, laid mines, coordinated with Kurdish scouts for early warnings, and they prepared for a second wave. It came just after dawn on April 7th. This time, the Iraqi attack was more cautious, probing, mostly infantry supported by technicals and mortars. They wanted to test American defenses, maybe find a weakness. They found none. The Americans responded with sniper fire, mortars, and another devastating airstrike. The Peshmerga, emboldened by the previous day's victory, held their ground fiercely. A Kurdish commander was overheard shouting over a radio, "This is our land. We fight here until it is free." By noon, the second attack was repelled. The victory at Debecka Pass was more than a tactical win. It was a turning point in the northern front of the Iraq War. The Iraqi regime had thrown one of its last mechanized spearheads against a small coalition of special forces and militia, and been destroyed. Within days, Kirkuk would fall. The north was crumbling. Later, generals and historians would review the engagement with awe. They would study how fewer than 30 American soldiers, using superior training, weapons, and coordination with indigenous forces, had stopped an armored assault in its tracks. But for the men who were there, what they remembered was the heat of the day, the whistle of RPGs, the whoosh of javelins, and the roar of American jets. They remembered the Kurdish fighters, under-equipped but determined, standing shoulder to shoulder with them. And they remembered the knowledge that even outnumbered and outgunned, with the right tools and the right resolve, you could hold the line. And at Debecka Pass, they did.